Hey, this is Daniel again with another video. In this case, ASMT front end. So here, let's start at the beginning. The ASMT front end package was simply created with the Create React app from Facebook. Here you'll see the base README. Probably going to go ahead and update this README with some more project pertinent information. But to start, it goes ahead and gives you some simple information about the Create React app, things to go forward with, as well as how to even just start and install the project. You'll probably want to start with some React tutorials. Those definitely help me get my head around components, as well as how React functions as a whole. To start with the application, we have the base app.js. The app.js is kind of the root of the page. Here, I will drag in a browser, and you can see here that this is just the base page. In this case, there's nothing here because nothing renders at the base page. But if you click on courses, we'll see that the URI changes to courses. And we see here is the course view, or actually the course list. Let's see how that functions. In the app.js, there's a render component. There's a component that renders the base page. In this case, I use the React router. This router goes ahead and gives you the ability to simply go ahead and say, add a particular path, embed this component. So as you can see, there's a container up top. Let's bring the website below. You can see a link to slash with the title home, a link to courses with the title courses. I see that those are the objects you see above. Below, though, is the router container. Here, we'll have things depending on which page or what is URI, which page you're visiting. So in the case of courses, it takes me to the course home page. This page goes ahead and queries the courses and displays them as card group items. I guess this page may be the simplest way to show you how the querying works. I have a little helper class called client. This will, in this case, it queries courses. As you can see, it's doing a query all, where it'll go ahead and get all these course objects and set loading to false. When the page refreshes, maybe depending on the frame rate of this video, you may or may not see a simple tag that says loading. You may have just seen it. This is to prevent the render function from completing. What I mean by that is that this query courses job is asynchronous. Your web browser will start to render the page, but this query course call in the background may not have been done yet. So to prevent a map over the courses and creating course cards with courses that would simply be null references at that point in time, at the top I have this state loading function, or state loading property, which will go ahead and show the loading screen until this query courses function returns back, setting the local course to courses and going ahead and setting loading to false. If we hop back to the app.js page, we'll see that when going ahead and specifying ID, after courses, we go to the course view. And when going ahead and having a lecture after that, we'll go to the lecture view when providing a lecture ID. This lecture view is probably one of the more complex pages in the project. Let's check it out. So from here, it's actually going ahead and querying two things, the lecture itself and the course that contains it. These two queries for data resolve in promises. These promises are added to an array and then waited for by this promise all. Promise all will wait until the promise for query course and the promise for query lecture complete. It'll then go ahead and set the loading state to false. This is for the same thing I had mentioned earlier. We don't want to go ahead and run the render function when a course or lecture object is a null reference. Below are some simple functions that do some help. Clean date goes ahead and converts the number of milliseconds since 1970, January 1st, whatever that the Unix time is. And it'll convert it to a nice date that's easily unreadable. We also have some extra helper functions like getLectureText, which creates this text right here. The date posted, length, time viewed, completion. As you see, we have the render function with the loading guard on top. And below, you'll see breadcrumbs. I haven't mentioned the breadcrumbs before, but as you can see, there's quite a few sections, dividers, section dividers. The section for the breadcrumb is actually the text. The divider is simply this fancy slash. Nothing too crazy here. This gives you the ability to go to the home, courses, the course page, the lecture page, this actual particular lecture, giving you the ability to click on any of these and go back to that page. If you check out the users, they actually have a page as well. The thing is, though, it's not implemented yet. So if we check out here, we have these view item objects. As everything, it's all imported from above. Let's jump into that. So the view item is simply a title with the user's name and a video data view right below it. The video data view is what does most of the work anyway. So as you can see here, the video data view imports D3. D3 is one of the three things that I've added to the base React starter kit for functionality in this. The first was the router I mentioned earlier, React router. The second being semantic UI. I'll go over that as well in a bit. And the third being D3. Once you're comfortable with JS to some certain degree, D3 should get pretty easy, but it does have a lot of its own kind of the own ways you work with it. So I'm going to try and break this down as easily as I can, but you're still going to have to do some research on the subject, to be honest. So to start, I'm going to go ahead and gloss over everything else. So we have some simple helper functions, and we have this render function. This render function makes no calls to D3. As you can see here, it just creates a div, and it creates this list that shows the user's information below. So how is this heat map created? Well, when the component finishes starting up, this draw chart function is called. So D3 is working independently of React and simply appends an SVG onto this div. So if these objects were to change, if in the future it's dictated that we want to go ahead and have the objects updating in real time or something like that, the D3 work will probably need to be updated as well. But for now, it's going ahead and just injecting a div into the component that has the heat map. You can see that here. Going ahead and taking the node being passed in is this node. And in this case, within the function, you can call it this node because it's being passed in. And you can go ahead and select another object called the tooltip. So the tooltip is a little tricky. And I'm going to have to hop out of this file to show you more about it. But for now, let's go how the heat map is drawn, and then we can move over to how the tooltip is handled. To first start, you need to scale the data. This heat map may be of any size almost. If I go ahead and shrink this, the heat map changes size. Well, D3 has some helper functions that kind of help you fit your data to the size of this, in this case, bar chart. I say bar chart when it's actually heat map. But how it functions on the underside is that simply this is a bar chart that first renders a background, being this light gray, and renders these boxes being the time start to time end, just on a left to right axis. So in the case of this scale, we take in the width of this chart. So in this case, the chart may be, say, 600 pixels wide. It scales the lecture length to that. So in this case, the lecture happens to be 47 minutes and 41 seconds. Well, that's 47 times 60 plus 41 seconds. Whatever number that happens to be, D3 will scale that data so that if you look at the pixels here, that this 600 pixel wide heat map covers 47 minutes and 41 seconds. Nothing more, nothing less. And if I were to go ahead and, like this user, go ahead and only view the video for 11 minutes, the data is scaled properly because it's passed through the scale function before rendering onto the heat map. I find this a little bit tricky to kind of explain, but I think through reading through the D3 guides, you'll see what I mean. Where you simply just don't want to take your data and say, oh, this is a bar graph of size 3600, and just throw random stuff out there, because you won't know how big your underlying canvas is and to how to fit and scale your data. So after the scale, we have some mouse over and mouse move functions. We'll ignore those for now because those are explicit to the tooltip that you've seen pop up a little bit. The next is I go ahead and append the background. This is that light gray background. Next is a select all. These are both happening to the SVG. The append will append the rect, as I had shown. And select all goes ahead and kind of does like almost a for loop over some data you feed it. In this case, it's the property view that I fed in. In this case, that is the view data object, and it'll pull the view data out. So it enters the data and will append a rectangle for each piece of data. In this case, I go ahead and scale the data and take the start time. That's going to be my X. As you see, there's no Y, there's no height to this. So I'm going ahead and starting at some point X. Starting from the bottom left corner, I go ahead and add a width to it. This is the scaled end minus start. So I go ahead and take whatever seconds ahead, and then I remove the start time from it. At this point, I take in the height of the bar, and I set that for the height of the rectangle I'm drawing. At this point, I have 2 points, and I'm able to draw the rectangle. This is then filled with gray, and is set as a transparent class. The transparency allows it so that the heat map can kind of become a heat map. It gets darker as these bars overlap. And after that, I register my mouse over, mouse remove, and mouse out functions. So let's move back to these tooltip functions. Mouse over goes ahead and sets the display to inline. You're wondering, what is it setting to inline? In this case, it's the tooltip div, referenced above here. When we get mouse out, meaning the mouse leaves the bar graph area, it goes ahead and sets the display to none, no longer displaying that div, which is the tooltip. Mouse move gets called after mouse over. This goes ahead and pull some information. In this case, I pull the information for the data that I'm hovering over and go ahead and get the view text. This is converting seconds to a minute:seconds string to build a simple little tooltip that shows you that in case for this video, this block means 25 minutes to 36 minutes. And that's just about it. Now to go to the actual tooltip, this div that's selected, we're going to need to go to a completely different file. So the tooltip is a component that I've created. And what it does is uses a React DOM function. This function called createPortal, you can look it up. It's pretty straightforward. What it's going to do is it's going to take my div that I've gone ahead and created here, being the div ID, tooltip, the class name. That class name is particular because I go ahead and I have some CSS that's applied on it. And then setting it to not display in the beginning. So when you first render the page, there's no tooltip to be shown until you mouse over something and it's set to display inline. This is going to attach it to the document body. In this case, in the actual page, if you go ahead and look at the HTML, you're going to have a body. What this div is going to be appended to is the root body of the page. If I were to go ahead within any point in this, so say I added the tooltip box to the video data view. First, we don't want to do that because then each video data view would have its own tooltip. But if I were to, the tooltip would be appended inside of the page here. And I wouldn't be able to, from D3's perspective, be able to move around the tooltip following my mouse. So the location that D3 is using in this case for the style where I set left and top is actually the page X, page Y of where your mouse is relative to the full page. If I were to go ahead, and if you can try it as well, if you go ahead and append the tooltip inside of this video view item, it'll be offset from the whole entire page. And as you scroll, it gets even more offset. So this tooltip div needed to be set to the root outermost object so that it's being transposed into the correct place. I think the last thing that would be useful to go over would be the developer tools. And in particular, something I mentioned on the installation, the React developer tools function. This goes ahead and actually shows the whole entire hierarchy of the React DOM. In this case, it has my menu up top, my container for everything in the page, the router which goes ahead and takes the location, and in this case, it will run the location provider, it goes to the router implementation. Reach actually adds in a bunch of nested layers, but eventually it makes it down into my lecture view, which is this page right here. And in this case, a useful part about the React developer tools is that you can see the properties in state at any point. So I can go ahead and see at this point, the course is microchip 6735, which is correct. And then I can go ahead and see that the lecture right here, I can see its length, I can see the date, I can see the name, I can see a bunch of stuff and allow myself to kind of debug from the front end. As well as it makes it useful if I were to go ahead and add a new field into here, I can see exactly what data is exposed right here instead of kind of guessing almost by just going ahead and looking at the objects that are present here. You can also in some cases toggle things. Like if I were to set loading to true, it'll go ahead and set the loading phase up. And then if I go ahead and remove that, it'll go back to rendering the page. So I think that this is a good stopping point. For the most part, coming from here, being the app.js, the router will direct you to a page, and each page has unique logic to go ahead and pull data, wait until the data is set, and render out the small components. I guess I should also maybe cover the client. The client is just a helper function. Actually, I call it function, but it's actually a class. In this case, it goes ahead and exposes this client that has a bunch of functions attached to it. And these are used to go ahead and query things like users, lectures, query particular lectures, query particular courses, and is used throughout the React application. I'm not using Redux or anything to hold the React state from page transition to page transition, which may be something that would be beneficial to do in the future. So I guess at this point, I've covered most of everything, and to keep myself from repeating the same thing over again, that's all.